I don't have $2,500 for a pair of Kreosote Nail Shanks, or at least that's what my wife says, and I definitely don't have 5 years to wait for a made-to-measure boot. I mean, I'm getting up there in age. So I figured I'd piece together my own. Obviously, it's not the nail shank, not even close. That boot's unreachable, unattainable for most of us. But what I wanted was to capture the spirit of it, the dark, waxed, industrial look, like something straight out of the 1950s. And after staring at Dale Leatherworks' posts, watching his video about it, and reading Carl Morawski's blog calling it his favorite boot, I figured, let's give it a try. The base for this project is a boot from an Indonesian maker called Imperium. I picked this pair up for a few reasons. First and foremost, it's one of the closest things I could find to the Kreosote Nail Shank without, it being one. The shape of the vamp and toe comes up to this corner, kind of like the nail shank signature angular toe box. It's a cap toe that's slightly elongated, like the real thing. The many eyelets sit close together, not quite as many as the original, but it gives the same clustered look going up the eye stay. Around the back, it's got this vertical strip of a backstay panel that overlaps the heel counter, which is slightly bulbous. From the side profile, you can see the silhouette really hugs the Achilles. That's one of those little details you see in the nail shank, though maybe not so little as the rear end is quite large. It sits on a half sole with a mile longer heel, so visually from the side, this boot gets you a good part of the way there. Now, top down, that's where you lose some of the refinement. The last on Indonesian boots tends to be a little blob shaped. It could use a tighter waist, it just needs more sculpting. It's not unflattering though. Considering the price, which is around $300 to $350 shipped, it's an eighth of the cost of a made-to-measure creosote, yet still gives you the opportunity to customize certain specifications, such as the leather. Kreosote usually uses natural or russet Wicked and Craig harness leather for his boots, so I told Imperium any light rough out would do, but they had this orange one lying around the shop. Figuring I'd wax the whole boot anyways, I wasn't too particular. And it took only shy of a month to produce instead of 5 years. But as far as the finish of the Kreosote boot goes, that's where owner JB Gabbard is very difficult to follow. But thanks to Dale Leatherworks' recent video about the nail shank, which goes into great detail about the creation of the boot's wax appearance, I now have my inspiration, so please do check out his YouTube channel linked in the description below. First things first, and as per the usual, I'll use masking tape to protect the stitching and edge of the boot, though you'll find out later how fruitless it was this time around. To prepare for the waxing, we'll need to gather a couple of supplies. To start off, I have a bunch of Venetian Shoe Cream. You'll need a fair amount for each boot. Then a cup or a bowl to mix in, something you don't mind throwing away later, a spoon to scoop and mix with, and black oxide powder. There is a lot of mystery to how this Kreosote nail shank finish is accomplished. There are descriptions from the website about walnut husk oil, olive oil, and vitamin E, but Dale would liken the finish to Horween's waxed flesh, just slightly more rough, and by just looking at pictures of the boot, most would agree this is achieved mostly with wax. Specifically, Kreosote is known to use beeswax, so I will assume that makes up the majority of the concoction. But since I have excess amounts of Venetian Shoe Cream on hand, I wanted to try to use what I had. I only needed to buy black oxide powder from Amazon to complement my supplies. The nail shank comes in many finishes, but the example you see most of the time is a dark grayish color, and I will try to replicate that. Gabbard uses oxide powders of varying colors to dye and wax all of his boots. I'm sure an ode to the gritty industrial styling that his boots embody, but also that he is somewhat of an artist, and I wouldn't be surprised if he used these pigmenting powders in other mediums before. A little black powder goes a long way. You only need just a small pinch for every ounce of shoe cream, so start very conservatively and add in small amounts to achieve a slight gray-cream color. Be sure to mix thoroughly before trying to adjust the coloring further, as the powder may be clumping somewhere in the mixture. The reason we're going for a light gray is the oils and waxes in the cream will darken the leather, so we don't need much more pigment to get to the result that we want. As I usually do, I'll apply the wax with a gloved hand. You can use another type of applicator, but I'll be using some pressure as I put on the cream. In other videos, I was waxing a pre-owned boot that was likely already matted. With this boot being brand new, the nap is quite long, and you'll want to try to smooth it out as best you can if you try this yourself. A brush, Q-tip, or some other applicator will be helpful in the nooks and crannies of the boot, such as the welt areas. This time around, I won't be covering the panel edges with tape. Certain versions of the nail shank, like the black hole, have dyed edges. The first nail shank has a bit of rawness to the exposed edge, in the sense there's some dye overlapping it. To mimic that, I'll scrape off some of the wax later on in the video, but feel free to leave the wax over it or protect it with tape to suit your preference. The bright base leather color will demand a few coats of Venetian Shoe Cream, but you don't have to perfectly cover the upper at first. In total, I did 5 applications, but don't do too many if they aren't necessary. As you heat or as the Venetian Shoe Cream naturally dries, the oil content will absorb into the boot and darken the leather. And as I'm trying to mimic this modern icon of a boot, the look itself isn't everything. To try to understand, I'll explain in terms of differences between this Indonesian boot and Kreosote's all-American one. We addressed the unremarkable last, and though this boot is comfortable, it and others I have from that country are larger in volume apart from the forefoot, but that kind of goes into the differences between what made to order is and made to measure. Made to order with various Indonesian brands does, yes, start with a sketch of your foot, but to understand the 3D nature of it, it should demand an in-person measurement. That contributes to a lot of regret, or what someone called the Indonesian roulette game of getting a well-fitting boot from one of those makers. I would clarify that there are cordwainers out there that make custom lasts after measurements are taken. From listening to Dale and looking at pictures of the shop from my boot friend Threads MD, I believe he has lasts that are modified to fit the foot of the client, which usually involves gluing leather to that last and sculpting it to shape. As you can imagine, it can become problematic if you're storing what would be hundreds of custom-made lasts that would be impractical for a literal shed of a boot-making shop. With made-to-order boots, you do get to choose your leather, and to make this boot as affordable as possible, I used local Indonesian source leather, but they can get hides from anywhere. This means you can get the same Wicked and Craig vegetable tan leather like Kreosote uses, but from a materials-only perspective, your nail shank will be all-American, and it will have leather counters and toe stiffeners, along with, of course, a hammered flat rail tie nail as a shank. But those materials don't tell the entire Kreosote story, because they are indeed a story. From how Gabbard words his descriptions, you can tell there's a strong callback to his life experiences and his appreciation for other art forms like cars and photography. You're not supporting just a bootmaker by buying a $2,500 boot, but really an artist who expresses his love for history and visuals through these pieces of footwear. This is not in any way to diminish our hardworking Indonesian boot friends who, just like Gabbard, are hand welting and hand lasting your boots, as they are now a fixture of any boot nerd's obsession progression. Let's say your first boot was a Thursday Captain, and as you look to expand your collection, you dabble in a Red Wing Classic Mock Toe or an Iron Ranger. That's quite natural and probably rings true to many people listening. After a while, and maybe after some of the metaphorical shine wears off your Thursdays or Red Wings, you begin to understand there are some things lacking in them. A few of those things come to mind. Firstly, the leather. Though both makers have some boots with really special uppers, it makes sense that a fan of boots would love to see a certain makeup with, let's say, horsebutt or shell cordovan. Going to Indonesia allows you to combine one of those really fancy uppers with all kinds of different patterns and bottoms. That makes the purchasing experience really quite fun. No different than modding your sports car or custom building a gaming computer. I think people generally like to have something unique to themselves. The next reason I think of that pushes us to buy a made-to-order boot is the fitment. And there are so many people that are larger volume or larger width who still want a great fitting boot. You can go to White's, Nick's, or Frank's to get that wider boot, but they are firmly entrenched in the Pacific Northwest styling. And by that I mean large, stitched down stitching, longer heels, and relatively brutish patterns. Should you want a more elegant offering, Sagara, Underhood, Bristle Black, and others come to mind. And we come to cost now. Let's say you love your Iron Rangers and wore out the sole. Knowing it lacks a midsole, maybe you want to not only resole but tune it up with an actual leather mid along with a leather heel stack to complement it. Well, now you're talking about $200 to $300 worth of work to get your Iron Rangers wearable again. At that point, you're almost paying for this Imperium boot entirely. Or let's go higher end. What if you wanted your very first pair of shell cordovan service boots? Using the same Horwing shell, you can spend $2,050 for a pair of 2030 Viberg shell boots right now, or you can order a custom underhood service boot for $1,000, but both are really incredible boots regardless. Saying that though now, that $2,500 cost from Kreosote doesn't sound all that terrible compared to a $2,000 Viberg boot, but that doesn't account for the turnaround time. Vibergs are off the shelf. How about the Indonesian boots? I'm sure you've all read the edge cases of a half a year or a year-long manufacturing time for some of them, but these boots on your screen right now took just 3 weeks. Another pair I have of Kyotokas only took a month. Most makers will quote you about 3 months, and many experience that typical turnaround time, though those outlier cases are just as real. As I wrap up the coatings of Venetian Shoe Cream, 5 in total, we'll finish with a brush down with a soft, clean horsehair brush. The boot is taking on a nice shine, but you can immediately tell it's very gray, and I like it to be slightly darker. Not a terrible thing, but Kreosote boots are known for their subtle colors, such as Dale's example having a brownish, greenish undertone. To mod this gray, I'll use some dark brown Venetian leather balm from a previous video's experiment. This will effectively darken the finish and warm it up a little as well. This brings up another discussion of creosote's coloring. As I mentioned before, the nail shank comes in many or potentially unlimited amounts of finishes, as they're all handmade. One of the popular versions is the rust color wax. I assume it's possible to achieve a similar look with another type of powder, iron oxide. And to prepare for this video, I bought scrap leather pieces and tried many combinations of oils and shoe creams, trying to replicate the nail shank look before finally settling on the process you see in the video, essentially scrapping the use of any oils at all. But if you want to experiment with colors and this process, I suggest you do the same, buying oxide powders of your desired color along with scrap pieces of leather. After another brushing, I'll try to expose some of the panel edges using a box cutter with the blade exposed to the thickness of the leather, so around 2-ish millimeters. I'm not trying to achieve a perfectly clean edge, just scraping enough to expose the bright orange nap. If you have the dexterity and accuracy for it, a low grit sandpaper could help this process along, especially for the eye state edges. And essentially we are finished. Taking off the tape reveals the stitching took the black color, but the monochromatic look isn't so bad. I replaced the laces with thick leather ones to match the original. Overall, I'm pretty happy, or mostly surprised that this worked well, as the pattern looks so much better with this color scheme, and the finish highlights the shadows and adds drama to the curves that were initially hard to appreciate. Thank you for joining me on this little journey, and if you enjoyed, please give a like and subscribe.